Believe me when I say there is no video on this channel more important to me personally than the one I am doing today. This is the big one, 007. Welcome to my ranking of the James Bond franchise. Since No Time to Die came out 6 months ago, I have been slowly rewatching all of these films so that I would have a completely fresh perspective coming into the ranking. And if we go back further than 6 months ago, I've been a Bond fan since the mid-80s, a long, long time. I've seen most of these films many, many times over, so this is an important rankings for me on a personal level. I did spend quite a bit of time working out which film would go where, and I do think there might be some controversy today as to where I've placed certain films, but this is just one man's opinion, so don't beat me up for them. There are millions of other Bond fans out there who would probably rank these films completely differently to me. Let me also say that I'm only including the Eon-produced Bond films. This ranking's going to be long enough as it is, so no Never Say Never Again, no Casino Royale spoof from 1967. I've not even seen that film. I've seen Never Say Never Again. If you're curious as to where I would have put Never Say Never Again, probably second from the bottom, but not quite bottom. So let's get into it. It's going to be a long video today, so let's not have too much waffle at the top end. So we'll jump in then at 25 with my least favourite Bond film by some considerable distance, I must add. I actually quite enjoyed this the first night I watched it at the cinema, but every subsequent viewing at home, the film has just got worse and worse, and I've come to the realisation now that this film is never magically going to get better for me just because I occasionally rewatch it. The first hour, though, is pretty good for the most part. The pre-title sequence is phenomenal, possibly one of the best in the franchise, and the idea of Bond getting captured and you see him getting tortured over the title sequence, very good idea. I like the Madonna song, but I'd say the rot starts to set in, ironically, in one of the film's best scenes when Bond and Zhao are getting exchanged. The end of that scene, Michael Madsen's FBI character comes in and says something like, "You'd think he was some kind of hero." It's just a really clunky, stupid, pointless line, and it's just a hint of the sort of stuff that's to come. And throughout the film, the amount of stupid things just really start to stack up and stack up. Probably the point where the action moves to Iceland is where the film really goes downhill. Bond parasurfing, I mean, that's the series' big jump the shark moment for me. It looks absolute garbage. The scene with the lasers is ridiculous. I mean, how can you have a fight with a room with all them lasers going around? They don't hit anybody. It doesn't make any sense. The Jinx character is absolutely awful. I don't like Graves as a villain, the second version of him, the English version. And the ending on the plane is really unimaginative. It's like something from a mid-budget, straight-to-video action film, if that's possible. So yeah, there's not many highlights in this film. I do like the Miranda Frost villain, but see, that even leads to a bad thing at the end. When her dead body's lying on the floor of the room on the plane, and Bond comes in, he just looks at her as if he's really sad that she's died. And this is the girl who had you in a North Korean prison for 2 years because of her deception, and you're looking at her like, oh, that's really sad. I mean, I know she was bad this week, but she could have got better with time. It's just silly. I mean, think back to how Bond reacts to Elektra betraying him in the previous film, and this reaction here doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Look, Die Another Day is absolute garbage. Objectively, it's garbage, and this was very, very easy putting this one at the bottom. I probably struggled with all the other 24, but not this one. Yep, so now we're into the good ones. For me in this series, there are literally 24 good films and one bad one. The Man with the Golden Gun, though, would probably come bottom of the pile of good ones. Scaramanga is a fantastic villain, brilliantly played by Christopher Lee, one of my favourite actors of all time. I love his fun palace. The island that he lives on is absolutely breathtakingly beautiful, but once you move past those things, the rest of the movie is kind of humdrum, and there are even problems with some of the scenes that take place on Scaramanga's Island. The final duel between Bond and Scaramanga is not as exciting as it should be. It's a little bit problematic that I actually enjoy the pre-title battle between Rodney and Scaramanga more than I do the finale later on. I mean, when that pre-title's happening, we're following this gangster character as he's seeing the fun palace for the first time, and it's exciting, but the Bond Scaramanga duel, the camera's just bouncing from one place to another. We're not even really following Bond, and I guess it's meant to be tense, but it's not. I've also got to mention one of the worst scenes in Bond history, when he escapes from a karate school and Lieutenant Hip, turns up with his two daughters, and they start kicking the crap out of all the karate guys, and it's just ridiculous. And then just to make it worse, they drive off without Bond. It's a terrible, terrible scene in so many ways. And I don't know, I guess when I look at this film as a whole, stuff like Bond swallowing a bullet and wearing a third nipple, these are not the things, not the exotic things I expect to see when I load up a James Bond film. So this one's a classic film, you know, I can watch it and enjoy it, but it's definitely one of the lower ones for me. But let me get this straight, it's still a cut above Die Another Day. So probably the first controversial moment in today's ranking, because I know a lot of people love GoldenEye. I've seen people put GoldenEye in their top 5, top 3. Wouldn't surprise me if for some people it's their favourite Bond of all. I still like it, don't get me wrong. It's got a lot of stuff in it that you can enjoy. Stuff to do with tanks and armoured trains. Trevelyan is a great villain. Sean Bean is amazing in this. Xenia Onatopp is a great henchwoman as well. And the Villain's Lair is probably one of the best in the series. But this is very much a film which seems to be lauded by a certain generation. So I'm 41. When this film came out, I was 15. And it's always felt like for people my age, they've always really loved GoldenEye, maybe because it was their first one. And remember, before GoldenEye, there hadn't been a Bond film since License to Kill in the 80s. So for a lot of kids who were in high school in the 90s, GoldenEye was like, wow, what is this new Bond thing? It's really, really cool. And they've always kind of loved GoldenEye ever since then. Plus, there was a really great video game that was a tie-in for this movie, which I personally really enjoyed as well. Probably GoldenEye is the best video game of all time, actually, the best Bond video game. So, like I said, for people of a certain age, I think they really kind of latch on to GoldenEye. I'd be fascinated to hear in the comments section from people who are, say, under the age of 25, who have had to discover GoldenEye as this old film that came out before they were born. How do you feel about GoldenEye? Do you feel like it is this terrific film that should be right up there near the top of anybody's Bond rankings, or is it a case of, I don't know what my dad's talking about, it's kind of average, really? In my case, GoldenEye wasn't my first rodeo. You know, I was watching Bond films back in the 80s, so when GoldenEye came out, for some kids it might have been their first Bond film, but for me, I was judging it against a whole load of other Bonds that I'd already seen and not quite matching up to those. So I still like it though, you know, but it does have a lot of problems that I could point to. So the soundtrack is probably the worst in the entire series. It was done by a guy called Eric Serra, I think. Experimental would be the word he might use, but it just doesn't work for me. There's a scene where Bond is walking through a casino, and instead of just focusing on what Bond's doing, I'm thinking to myself, every time I watch the film, I'm thinking, what am I listening to in this scene? And the song that plays on the end credits does not fit the movie we've just watched at all. So I kind of feel like the first Bond film back after 6 years, they should have done a more traditional sort of Bond soundtrack instead of whatever the hell they were going for here. And throughout the movie, there are some moments of sloppiness in the editing and the directorial choices that I do notice every time I watch this. In the pre-title sequence, I don't like the black silhouette of Bond coming down in the toilet. It's just a bit silly for me. And when Bond drives the motorbike off the cliff, he's a good 2 or 3 seconds too slow for me. He should be going off the cliff quicker to make it more realistic that he can get on that plane. And the moment that Pierce Brosnan's trying to clamber into the plane, it looks really dated now, the special effects they've done for that. It's almost like something you'd see in Thunderball or something. And then when the plane comes back up, all the soldiers have magically disappeared off the cliff for no reason. It's just a few sloppy moments here and there with this film, and some of the stunt doubles in it are really obvious, particularly later on when Xenia's coming down the rope off the helicopter. And we're talking about fine margins in this Bond ranking because I like pretty much most of these films. So in terms of separating them, you know, it's just the barest things that could stop GoldenEye being 5th compared to, say, being 23rd, and that's what's happened to it, just a few little things. So yeah, for me, it's not quite this classic, amazing Bond film. I do rank it quite low, but I still like it. Let me just sneak that in one more time before we move on to the next film. Another one that's probably lower for me than it is for most other Bond fans. There is a lot to love about this film. Donald Pleasance is amazing as Blofeld. Pleasance is one of my favourite actors of all time, and I love his interpretation of this character. The volcano set is amazing, and it's actually a real set. There's proper depth in that set. There's nothing fake about it. The soundtrack to this film is probably one of the best. I mean, I can just wallow in the music for this film without even fully focusing on the story. The main theme by Nancy Sinatra is just beautiful, it really is. And all the stuff in space that you see is really cool. Japan looks fantastic in the film. There's a lot to enjoy, but there are also a lot of bad things as well, a lot of plot holes. This film was written by Roald Dahl, and it shows he's just not maybe cut out for something like this. So honestly, I don't even know where to begin. So I guess let's start with the character of Aki, who's actually a really, really good character and could have been one of the best Bond girls of all time, in my opinion. But because they were really trying to stick to this Bond formula by this point, they felt like they had to get one more love interest in there. So they just pointlessly kill Aki off halfway through this. It's a silly death. She's never mentioned again after she dies. And they bring in this other girl who just gets no characterization. You never even hear her name. So it's literally just pointless killing Aki off. And then there's other things that annoy as well. So at one point, Tanaka gets this magnet to lift up this car full of bad guys and drop it into some docks, but he has another helicopter seemingly filming this thing. So just to take out a few bad guys, he's got two helicopters going simultaneously just for the purpose of proving to Bond that he did kill these guys. It doesn't entirely stand up. Also, when Bond goes into Asato's office, he just happens to have this massive load of safe cracking equipment when he had no idea that he was going to come across a safe. Now, if the safe cracking equipment had been like really tiny and just standard issue to have tucked away in your pocket, fine, but it's like this massive great thing. Also, Helga Brandt, when she takes Bond up in her plane, her plan is to trap Bond's hands so she can quickly escape and parachute to safety. But this board thing that pops out, she's assuming that Bond's just going to have his arms out perfectly like that, just at the moment she needs to escape. And also this board is just going to shoot across perfectly to wedge the hands in. When I picture that, it just wouldn't work at all. So there's loads of things throughout this movie, loads of little things that you can point at and go, not sure about that. Worst of all, the pre-title sequence. Now, I like the space part of this, but once we cut to Bond with the Chinese girl, after that, it's like, what the hell? I have no idea what's going on in this scene. I get that Bond's faking his death, sort of, but is he aware of this at the time that he's with the Chinese girl, or is it a case of MI6 are doing it for him and he doesn't even know what's going on? So when the bed flops up, I don't know if Bond's in on it or not at this point, and some guys with guns run in and shoot the bed. Are these guys in on it as well? Are they firing fake bullets to convince somebody else that Bond's dead? Or are these guys firing real bullets because they're trying to kill Bond and the bed's just bulletproof somehow? No idea. I've seen the film like 20 times. I have no idea what's going on in this scene. And then a bit later on, Bond is actually in his own coffin on a ship, and there's like a Blofeld, one of Blofeld's agents is watching this through binoculars. Why does Bond have to be in the coffin? It's not like this agent is going to swim over to the ship, get on the ship and go, hang on, I come from Blofeld, we need to verify this, I'm afraid. Oh, yeah, it's definitely Bond and he's dead. Right, carry on, gentlemen. He's not going to be allowed to do that, so why have Bond in the coffin? So many things I can pick apart in this film, and because I like most of the James Bond films, I have to look at this stuff in terms of, deciding where I'm going to place the films on the list. It's still a glorious Bond film. I can still really enjoy it, but yeah, this one's only going to come in this position for me. This one probably has the biggest roster of great James Bond villains in the entire series. So there's Kananga, Teehee, Baron Samedi, Whisper, Adams is pretty good, the short amount of time that he's in the film. I even like the smiling cab driver who turns up now and again and has Bond in the back of his cab. Really funny little side character. I really like Jane Seymour as Solitaire in this. I think she's a great Bond girl. Still acting today, Jane Seymour. Something popped up in my Google feed just a couple of weeks ago about the fact that Jane Seymour's got a brand new drama series out, even in 2022. I mean, it's been more than 50 years now since Live and Let Die, and she's still going. I think that's quite incredible. Easily the weakest part of this film, though, is, ironically, one of the Bond villains I've not yet mentioned, Rosie Carver. I cannot stand her character. The 5-10 minutes she's in this film is easily the weakest part of it, and her presence overshadows something that should have been really cool, i.e. Bond getting to hang out with Quarrel's son. As for the rest of the film, there's not too much I could pick apart, not in the same way that I could go at You Only Live Twice at any rate. Some of the vehicle chases in like cars, boats, planes feel very slow moving by today's standards. Bond not being in the pre-title sequence is a little bit problematic for me as well. But there's so much stuff to enjoy. That the scene with the crocodiles is fantastic. I love the scene where Kananga confronts Bond about whether he slept with Solitaire. The finale in Kananga's lair is fantastic as well, although this does remind me of something that happened to me as a kid when I was watching this film. I think I've told this story before on the channel, but what the hell, I'm going to tell it again anyway. So this one time when I was watching Live and Let Die, it was back in the days of, you know, aerials being on top of TVs because you had the analog signal thing going on. I got almost to the end of this film, like probably 10 minutes from the end, and it was just at the moment where Bond and Solitaire are in the caves and they're about to find Kananga. So in my head, what happened at the point where Bond and Solitaire are just leaning back against a rock wall, I think, and some of Kananga's men run past, and then the signal went just at that moment, and I was like, whoa, what the hell? I was moving this aerial around in desperation and banging on the TV and stuff, and because this was like live TV all the time, the film is just slipping away from me, and I couldn't get the signal back. God knows what happened, but I was really upset when I went to bed that night. I think I was only like 8, 9 at the time, so yeah, that's a story I'll never forget. But Live and Let Die is a cool film. This is actually my cousin's favourite James Bond film. For me, it's only 21, but it just goes to show for everybody, these films are different, you know. Pierce Brosnan's not doing very well today, is he? This is now 3 of his films that have come out already. It's just not one of my favourite Bond eras, to be honest. But this one was at least an improvement over GoldenEye for me. Although the quality of the film follows a similar trajectory to Die Another Day, insofar as the first hour is absolutely the best of it. Although at least in the case of Tomorrow Never Dies, the film doesn't drop off a cliff at the halfway point. The biggest weakness of this film for me is probably the bike chase, which I just find really awful, and I've no idea what the tactics are with the helicopter pilot in this scene. It's just absolutely all over the place. Replace that sequence with something else, and this film could have finished 5 or 6 spots higher today. But again, we go back to this idea of fine margins when it comes to separating films of this quality, but there's so much that you can enjoy in this. I love the pre-title sequence with the aeroplane. The scene in the newspaper factory is probably my favourite in the movie. I love that. Also the moment where Bond has to swim down to the Devonshire, and the scene in the car park with the remote control car. It's a solid Bond film. Very, very little that I can pick out when it comes to this one. And it's the only Bond film that I've seen in the cinema twice, purely by happenstance. I saw it this one time with friends, and then I went to stay with my brother, and because he hadn't seen it, I went to see it a second time. Normally I don't watch Bond films twice at the cinema in the space of a week. This was a rare exception. Similar to GoldenEye, the biggest weakness of this one is probably the soundtrack. I'm a big stickler for good music in movies, and this film doesn't deliver on that score. I'd also say that Gladys Knight's song License to Kill is probably my least favourite theme song in the entire Bond franchise. The pre-title sequence is also one of the weakest, it has to be said. All this business about, hey, let's go fishing! Yeah, not really one of the best, is it? But once we get past the point where Sanchez escapes, the rest of the film is brilliant after that point. I've no problem at all with the idea of Bond going rogue. In theory, I do prefer really serious Bond films like this as opposed to ones that are just silly and aloof. So it does pain me a little bit putting this film in 19th because there's not a lot I could criticise about it, and there's so much to enjoy. I love the scene where Bond goes to the aquarium type place, and also when he fights Crest's men out at the ocean, and the whole finale when he fights Benicio del Toro and then in the drug factory and then goes out and chases Sanchez down on all those trucks. Fantastic stuff. And I love the scene as well earlier on where Bond comes down on this rope and sets up this like toothpaste detonator sort of thing. Really cool stuff. It's a really, really great movie, despite the fact that it's only come 19th. And that's your lot today, I'm afraid, when it comes to Timothy Dalton, but I feel very guilty about that because I love Dalton as Bond. I like both of his films. I can't really give you an explanation as to why the two Dalton Bonds have only come 18th and 19th today. It doesn't seem fair at all because I've hardly got any criticisms about The Living Daylights, but I've just got to go with my gut when it comes to the middle part of this ranking because it is the toughest part of doing something like this. I mean, I can easily talk about my favourite few Bond films and I can easily mention what my least favourite bunch of Bond films would be. But when you get into the middle part, and I'm talking like 10, 15 films, it's very hard to separate a lot of them. They are very, very equal in terms of quality, and The Living Daylights has maybe come out a little bit lower than it could have done. I don't know, I'm just going on instinct here, but there's so much to like about this film. I love the Necros villain. The way that he infiltrates MI6 as a milkman is just fantastic, and the fight that he has with Bond on the back of the plane is just amazing. I like the European section of this film. There's some good spycraft. I like the Saunders character. Cara's relationship with Bond is well handled. We get a decent soundtrack with this one. There's tons of good stuff in it. And what makes me feel especially guilty about putting it 18th is the fact that this was the first Bond film I ever saw at the cinema. Shame on me, shame on me. And just like that, we're saying goodbye to Pierce Brosnan at this point as well, although for me this is absolutely the best of the Brosnans. This is where his tenure peaked, and back when this film came out he was getting a lot of plaudits for the way that he was playing James Bond. It seems crazy to think now, but that is absolutely how it was at the time. In the media he was like the darling, you know, he was one of the top Bonds of all time, and then that just kind of changed once Daniel Craig came along. When The World Is Not Enough came out in cinemas, it kind of felt at that point like we were maybe halfway through the Brosnan run. If you'd have told me at the time, no, he's only going to do one more Bond film, I would have found that really crazy. Like, really? Why is that then? But this one has a really great story. I think the betrayal of Elektra is pretty well handled. The arc of that throughout the movie is quite well done, although I personally might have been tempted to swap the roles around so that Denise Richards played Elektra and Sophie Marceau plays the nuclear scientist. I think Sophie Marceau would have been a much more believable nuclear scientist. As it is, Denise Richards is not very good in that role. It's partly her fault because she's not the most amazing actress, but also the script doesn't do her any favours. When you get lines like when Bond asks her what she's doing in Kazakhstan and she just replies, avoiding questions like that, well, that's the ideal moment for some characterisation, so it's not the best writing at that particular moment, but assuming that Richards could have pulled off playing King's daughter, I think she might have suited that role better, and I think it might have given more weight then to this idea that Bond can get himself into trouble because he does have a weakness with women. You know, if he'd suddenly realised, Jesus, what am I doing just randomly sleeping with these women, and it turns out that this girl's been in bed with Renard the whole time. But the rest of the film is so enjoyable. I love the caviar factory scene. I like Zukovsky's role in the whole film, actually. The moment where he shoots Goldie is like, it's gold, you know, it's fantastic. And the pre-title sequence is great as well. And I didn't like the submarine ending when I first saw it at the cinema, but over time I've really come to appreciate this sequence. I think it's a really great end to the movie. So even though I've only put this one 17th, I kind of feel like I still like The World Is Not Enough more than most Bond fans, because as far as I understand it, this is not one of the more popular ones at all, but I've always kind of gone into bat for it. It is my favourite of the Brosnans, even though it's only come this low today. This one has definitely improved for me over the years. I did this rankings a couple of years ago, and I'm sure that Diamonds came like 20th, 21st, so it's really improved for me. It's got tons of weaknesses though, and things that are not quite right. I mean, films like The World Is Not Enough and The Living Daylights for me have got far fewer weaknesses than Diamonds Are Forever. But the thing is, Diamonds is so fun. It's so entertaining. I can kind of look past some of the faults. I guess the biggest one is the death or not death of Blofeld. I mean, they really fudged that. I think they ran out of time and money. They were meant to film like an extended ending where Bond fought Blofeld in like a salt mine or something. There's also a really dodgy stunt about halfway through the film where they did it the wrong way, so they had to flip the imagery so that the car driving through a thin alley suddenly switches the other way. It looks terrible once you realise what's going on with that. And there are other things throughout this film which you could really pick at if you wanted to, but the script is so amazingly funny. Tom Mankiewicz did such a great job with this. I love the scene where Bond dresses up as Dr. Hergesheimer and goes into Professor Metz's lab. And the whole Vegas setting is just fantastic in this, actually, especially when Bond is going up the side of the building and you can see Vegas in the background. I do think that they should have used Plenty O'Toole a lot more, maybe had her turn out to be a double agent or something. And part of the reason I say that is because I don't like Tiffany Case as a Bond girl in this. She's probably one of the weakest parts of this film. I love the soundtrack, though. There are so many great tunes on the Diamonds soundtrack. And even though Charles Gray has not always been one of my favourite Blofelds, he's improved for me over time as well. So I really love this film, actually, now. It's got its faults, but it's just so entertaining to watch. And I've got to mention Wynton Kid as well, two of the best henchmen in all of the Bond franchise. I just love those guys. I love their little tune that they've got that's just specifically for them. This is another one which is virtually faultless. I mean, for the time that it came out and the budget that it had, this film did a great job of nailing the Bond formula pretty much straight out of the gates. I mean, there would be little embellishments that they would add later on, like the gun barrel and Q, but for a first attempt, this is pretty damn impressive. And it's also a film which gets better the more you go through the runtime of it, which is not an easy thing to pull off for any film in any genre. You know, you get a reasonably slow start with Bond just being a detective in and around Jamaica, but then things really pick up when we get to the Crab Key section of the film and Bond meets Honey and quarrel, and then things get even better for the finale when Dr. No comes into the mix and you get this exciting end to the film. Dr. No's a great villain. He's not in it that much, but when he's on screen, he's absolutely great. I think Honey Rider as a Bond girl is a little bit overrated. I mean, take out the fact that she was the first Bond girl and take out the fact that she comes out of the ocean in that glamorous way, and it's hard to really make any kind of argument that she's better than most of the Bond girls that would come after her. I'd also say that the soundtrack in this film is not particularly great, but I'm not going to count that as a negative mark against the movie because this was 1962. You know, this is just how music was in movies back then, but certainly by the time we would get to From Russia With Love and Goldfinger, the soundtracks would be a lot better, but I really like Dr. No. I'm not going to feel any shame at putting it 15th in my ranking, and I'm in an especially good mood with this film this week because I am 2 days away from seeing this film in the cinema, bizarrely. They're doing a special 60th anniversary screening at View Cinemas around the country at the moment. In fact, by the time this video comes out onto YouTube, I might have already seen that viewing, but yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. That's going to be really cool, getting to see the first ever Bond film in cinemas. This is another moment where I suspect some people might raise their eyebrows at what I'm doing here. I know some people think this is the best Bond film of all. A lot of people at least have it in their top 5. I really like it, don't get me wrong. I mean, I think every Bond film from about 20th and up is great. I can't even tell you how amazing this film was to watch when it came out. I mean, the Bond franchise was in a mess after Die Another Day. You had a Bond actor who still wanted to be Bond and was still young enough to play Bond, but creatively there was just nowhere to go with him, and they had this dilemma. Do we do something different? Do we persist with Brosnan? And in the end, they decided to do something new and also change the style of the franchise. And I still remember the night that I went to watch Casino Royale at the cinema. And honestly, by the time we got to the end of the film and Daniel Craig stands up and says Bond, James Bond, and the music kicks in, I had such goosebumps. I felt like my franchise had been saved. So fast forward to 2022, why is this film therefore only coming 14th today? I don't know, like I've already said several times today, there's so little between these films. I only watched the Craig ones again quite recently, and I did enjoy Casino a little bit less than the ones that follow it. I think I do prefer my James Bond to be a more seasoned agent, not to be such a newbie. I think that's part of it. I also noticed during the card playing sequence in Montenegro, which does go on for a significant amount of time, that scene, it switches around a lot. You know, Bond's at the table playing cards, and then he's off doing something else, and then he's playing a bit of cards, and then there's some other kind of interlude, and then he gets poisoned, and then he plays a bit more cards. And as someone who actually understands poker and has played a little bit of poker now and again, I do feel a little bit frustrated watching these scenes. Like, I just want to watch the poker duel for longer than what we get. I understand why the director Campbell had to kind of feel like people aren't going to sit and want to watch cards. He has to, you know, put this or that exciting thing into the mix just to keep the momentum going. I find it a little bit frustrating, at least on repeat viewings, watching these scenes, because I just want to watch the card game, at least for a little bit longer than what we get to see. And of course, some of the hands that Bond and Le Chiffre get in this film are absolutely ridiculous. I kind of wonder whether there could have been an extended cut of this film on Blu-ray where the card sequence was, you know, 10, 15 minutes longer, maybe, just so you could get to enjoy the intricacies of the card game. But I guess most people would probably disagree with me on this and say that the card game already goes on a little bit too long. I don't know. For the most part, though, this is an absolutely great film. It does have a very unique story, which was sort of copied from the original Fleming novel, and I ain't going to argue with you. If you think this is the best Bond film of all, I've probably been a little bit harsh on it today, but this is just the way the cookie has crumbled. Let me just quickly say that there are about to be spoilers for this film. I presume you have seen No Time to Die. If not, exit the video quickly. So yeah, I found it difficult to process what happens at the end of this film since I watched it for the first time at the cinema. And the weird thing is, the film leading up to the ending is pretty fantastic, actually. I have to wonder, had we got a more normal Bond ending, would I consider this to be one of the best Bond films? Possibly, I'm not sure about that, but certainly it was upsetting when I realised what was going to happen at the end of this. And I didn't know, going into the cinema, I didn't know what was going to happen. I'd avoided spoilers. I went to watch it actually with my wife and my oldest son, who was 10 at the time the film came out. His first Bond film at the cinema. Imagine that, your first Bond film at the cinema is the one where Bond dies. So yeah, we were all a bit taken aback. We did not expect that. And I've been trying to sort of process it ever since. Is it a good thing for the series? Was it a mistake? And I don't think I'll ever think it's a good thing to kill Bond at the end of this film. I still, even now, talking about it now, would have preferred it if he'd lived. I'm slowly starting to appreciate the artistic choice and what they were going for. It's not been easy, but I can accept it, I guess. And I think as the years go by and I watch the film more and other Bond films come along, and therefore No Time to Die sort of drifts back into the pack chronologically, I think it will improve for me. I can easily see that this eventually does become a top 10 Bond film for me, maybe. And it's done all right even now, coming 13th. I appreciate what the director did with this film in terms of its style. It does feel very closely aligned with what Sam Mendes did with Skyfall and Spectre, not just in terms of the story beats and stuff that's carried forwards, but just in the way that it's directed. It does feel like it could have been another Sam Mendes film to me. But yeah, I'm coming around to it. It was upsetting at the time, but I'm starting to get used to it. I'm starting to get over it. This is another one which has greatly improved for me over the years. I find that as I get older, I can sort of be less offended by some of the more comedy-centric Bond films, if you like, things like Diamonds and Moonraker. There comes a point in this film, I'd say around about when Bond spots the road women in the Amazonian rainforest. At that juncture, there's still like 30, 40 minutes to go, but everything after that point is amazing. I love the part of the film where Bond goes into space. I'm a big fan of sci-fi anyway. I love the design of the space station. The music is absolutely out of this world incredible. It's probably one of the best Bond soundtracks of all, this one. One of the best pre-title sequences as well. That scene where Bond falls out of the aeroplane without a parachute is spectacularly good. Great villain. He comes out with so many great lines like, now you see the splendor of my conception, stuff like that. It's just fantastic. What lets this film down is probably a 20-25 minute spell in the middle where so much silly stuff happens. It's mostly when Jaws comes into the action. So the cable car sequence, which should have been great, is absolutely appalling. The scene on the waterfall with Jaws going over, pulling a silly face is daft as well. There's a very silly boat chase in Venice, although I do like the other stuff in Venice where Bond goes into this building and sneaks up on these scientists, and then he has a big fight with Chang. So if the middle section of the film had been tidied up a little bit, this could have been one of the all-time great Bond films. As it is, I can't quite bring myself to put it in the top 10, but I still really, really love the movie, warts and all. This is a criminally underrated one in my opinion, and only just misses out on my top 10. I didn't like it when I first saw it at the cinema. My first impression was probably the same as most people, but I think maybe that's part of the reason why a lot of people don't like it, is that they've never really gone back to it and given it another chance, because over the years I've really come to develop an appreciation for it. It is quite a short Bond film. I think it's possibly the shortest in the series. It's either this one or Doctor No. I can't remember exactly which one of the two is the shortest, but I think the short, breezy style of this film actually really works well for it. Every scene is so economically filmed, and we just kind of shoot through very quickly, but it works for this film. I like how we go to a lot of different locations, and they've all got different style title cards, and the opera scene, more than any other, is the highlight for me. It's spectacularly well edited, well put together sequence of events. Bond infiltrating Quantum with his little mic thing, and the music in this particular section is amazing. I think the whole ending at the hotel in the desert is fantastic. Cinematography, absolutely amazing. I think the Bond girl's great. Olga Kurylenko, might have that name a little bit wrong, but I think her relationship with Bond in this film is very intelligently written, very believable. I like that character. I can't actually think of a name off the top of my head. Underrated Bond villain as well, and I don't know, it's I wouldn't want a film like this every time, you know. I am a fan of the longer Bond films. A lot of my favourite Bond films are some of the longer ones, but this particular film, I don't know, it just works having this short, breezier style, and it's a film I've really, really come to really appreciate over the years. And just talking about it now, I'm a little bit regretful that I didn't just sneak it into the top 10, but there we go. So into the top 10 we go, and a change of clothes for me. This video proved to be way too long to do in one day, so I am back for day 2 of talking about Bond. These things take a lot longer to film than they take to actually watch, believe me. So Octopussy is a film which I think is unfairly pigeonholed, I think, by people who maybe only dip their toes into the Bond world every now and again, because it's kind of got a reputation, this film, as being a little bit silly, a bit cartoonish, you know, Bond in a clown suit, etc, etc. I have seen more than one Bond ranking online where you get down to Octopussy in like 20th place, and underneath it just says, Bond in a clown suit, enough said, a series low. And I'm thinking to myself, Bond in the clown suit is not this film. This is mostly quite a serious spy film that follows on the same sort of style as For Your Eyes Only. I mean, this one is a little bit more comedic occasionally throughout the film, but not much. It is pretty grounded for the most part, and the stuff in the clown suit, it's a very serious scene. Roger Moore's playing it very straight. There's a ticking time bomb. It's very tense. Potentially kids and parents are going to get their limbs blown off. It's only a silly thing if you just look at pictures of the film and you see Roger Moore with his makeup on, but if you actually watch the scene and how it plays out, it's very, very serious. There's only one thing in this film that for me is silly, and that's the Tarzan yell, and to be honest, even that doesn't really bother me. It only bothers me because it bothers other people, but there's so much to like about this one. This one's got my favourite pre-title sequence in the whole series. It's amazing. It's so clever how Bond gets the missile to follow him into the warehouse and blow up his intended target. One of my favourite theme songs as well, possibly in my top three, maybe. I think Nobody Does It Better is probably my absolute favourite, but All Time High might just be second, third, very, very high up. I love the Indian location in this film as well. It's absolutely gorgeous. They should do a 4K of this film, definitely. It especially looks good when Bond's being chased through the underbrush by Kamal Khan. Brilliant rogues gallery of villains in this one as well. And a little bit of a shame that maybe they didn't have an Indian Bond girl in this one, given that we're in India a lot of the time. Be interesting to know if that bothers Indian Bond fans, that there is a distinct lack of Indian characters, I think, in this film for the most part. That VJ's in there, I guess. But Govinda doesn't exactly say a lot, does he? So, on the whole, I think this is another really underappreciated Bond film, and I'm proud to put it in my top 10. This film is absolutely gorgeous. The cinematography is Oscar-worthy, and I love Sam Mendes' style of directing, the way he gives scenes time to breathe. I mean, I like the fast-moving style of Quantum of Solace as well, but I also like it when a Bond film goes about things in this way as well, because you can't take your eyes off this story. Even though it's possibly not one of the best stories in the franchise, it has a few little things that are a little bit iffy, such as the way that Silver manages to escape MI6, but on the whole, terrific film. Some of its highlights for me, Bond going after Patrice in Shanghai, and that's a really serious scene. It's a good bit of stalking, good bit of stealth, and then you get this more comedic scene where Bond fights these thugs in the casino, and Daniel Craig's facial expressions when he's in danger of getting attacked by that weird creature thing, absolutely priceless. There is more of an attempt in this one, I think, to insert some humour compared to, say, Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace, which were mostly just serious films. I also love all of the underground stuff in London. I think that's fantastic. And the scene where Bond sprints through the streets and just saves M is just filmed in the most amazing way, with M reading the poetry out at the same time you see Bond sprinting down the street. It's just top-notch stuff. Weaknesses, I was never a big fan of the finale in Scotland the first time I saw the film. That has got better for me, I think, on recent rewatch. And I don't really like the pre-title sequence that much. It's a little bit sluggish. It's just not as exciting as what's come before. And I don't like the fact that the gun barrel is not in this film. Now, I actually agreed with the decision not to have it at the front of Quantum of Solace, because for me, that film just worked so well, having the first thing you see be the lake, and then it cuts to the tunnel, and then I'm not sure how you would mix that with the gun barrel, but at the start of Skyfall, you get this scene where Bond just comes out into a shadow, and that's the first you see of him. It's a nice-looking shot, but I don't think it's good enough to justify not having the gun barrel. I'd rather they just have gone with something else, like, you know, do the gun barrel and open up on the Turkish market or something like that. So I would have liked to have seen the gun barrel at this stage of Craig's tenure, but Skyfall is a film which is shooting up in my estimation for me. I think the last time I did this ranking, it was much lower, like 13th, 14th. It was one of my more controversial opinions at the time. I've now got it up into my top 10, so I'm getting there with this. For me, it's now my second favourite Craig film. So we're saying goodbye to Daniel Craig at this point. When it comes to the Craig era, they're all brilliant films for me. In my ranking today, they've all come between 14th and 8th. None of them quite make it into my masterpiece part of the rankings, if you like, but they're all brilliant in their own way, and I think Spectre is the best of them, which is not a popular opinion, I accept, but I absolutely love this film. For me, this is where the Craig era peaked. I've heard it said that people don't like the fact that Blofeld turns out to be like the kingpin of all the previous Craig films, and although I personally might have left that stuff out, it doesn't really bother me. It's not a massive part of the Spectre plot. I mean, Blofeld mentions it at one point towards the end when he says, "I'm the author of all your pain," blah, blah, but it's only a brief thing, and then we move on to the rest of the film, you know, and in my head, Blofeld is possibly funding, like, some of the enterprises that, say, Silver and Dominic Green have got up to, but it's not like he's the mastermind of those things. You know, I can't imagine that when, say, Dominic Green was thinking up his water supply scheme in Bolivia, I can't imagine that Blofeld was actually the person who came up with that and took Green in a room and said, "Look, I've got this scheme for you to do that's really going to annoy James Bond, so here's what I want you to do." I don't think it was like that. I think it was actually Dominic Green's scheme, and maybe he got some funding off Spectre or something, but I don't think Blofeld was that involved. That's how I picture it anyway, and it's possible that Blofeld's just exaggerating how much he was involved in all those prior films just to annoy Bond. But anyway, I love the way that Christoph Waltz plays Blofeld, and his volcano, the way it's set up in this film, I think is absolutely brilliant. The way they've stripped it back and almost made it completely the opposite from the volcano in You Only Live Twice, and as a location, it just looks absolutely gorgeous. I love the Hinks character as well. That fight on the train is possibly the best fight in the series. I think it's either that for me, or the one with Oddjob, or maybe the one with Red Grant. I think those three might be the best fights in the series, but God, I enjoyed that scene on the train. And pre-title sequence as well is absolutely spectacular in so many ways. This film gets off to a flying start against Skyfall because of the pre-title sequence. You know, if you match these two Sam Mendes films side by side, I think Skyfall is playing catch-up against Spectre after the pre-title sequences are over. Theme tune, great. And yeah, the only thing I could really say against Spectre is possibly the conclusion in London. It's not that it's terrible, but it's just not quite up to the standards of the brilliant film leading up to that point. Sam Mendes seemingly struggles a little bit with his finales. I don't know, it's a little bit of a stretch that Blofeld will get so quickly to London and set up this trap that isn't even that good, because Bond escapes it quite easily. But on the whole, I love Spectre. I'm a massive defender and fan of this film. For me, it is absolutely Craig's best. This one has the best action sequence in the entire franchise for me. I refer to the part that takes place at the Italian ski slopes. It's not Sardinia, is it? Corsica? No, it's not going to come to me, but there are so many different facets in that sequence, all kind of blended together seamlessly. Probably the best bit is when Bond is on the bobsled, but on skis. Somebody, I believe, did die making that sequence, or was really badly wounded. I can't remember which, but leaving that aside, it's still a really great thing to watch. And there's also a bit where Bond's being chased on motorbikes, and then he goes on this big ski jump thing and goes off that, and there's all sorts of different stuff going on in this sequence. So even though this is meant to be like a return to kind of, you know, low-key Bond, it's trying to keep the action and the stunts to a minimum and stuff, it still ends up, for me, producing the best action sequence in the series. And I think this film also has the most tense moment in the series when Bond goes on that cliff near the end and he almost falls off. Every time I watch this film, and I've probably seen it 20 times since I was a kid, I always think that finally that clip is going to fall out of the rock. It just seems impossible that the clip is even still in at one point. It looks like it's hanging onto the cliff by sweat. It doesn't seem possible that it could support Roger Moore's weight, at least in those last 2 or 3 seconds before he gets up and throws the knife. I also love the underwater part where Bond goes down to the wreckage with Melina. That scene is probably the most beautiful looking scene in the entire film. We're really getting into the good Bond films now, aren't we? And even though the score is not quite the typical Bondian sort of score you'd normally get in these films, it works. I've got real affection for the music in this film. If you're going to do something different, if you're going to be experimental, at least make the music as good as this. So yeah, big For Your Eyes Only fan. This is a much celebrated Bond film. I think it's probably quite rare that you'll see a Bond rankings where this is outside the top 10. I've met at least one person in the past who was very adamant that this is the best Bond film of all, and very hard to argue against that because it's almost a perfect film, really. There are 2 scenes in particular in this film that I absolutely love. One of them is very well known, one of them maybe not so well known. So starting with the well known one, the whole segment on the train is just absolutely magnificent. Watching the way that Red Grant slowly worms his way into Bond's favour, and then you get that terrific fight at the end of it all. But this whole sequence from the beginning of it, when Bond and Kerim and Tatiana get on the train, right to the very end when Bond and Tatiana get off it, it's just absolute gold. I love that entire journey and everything that happens on it. The other scene that I love in this film that is not so well known is the one that takes place in the mosque earlier on. the music is just absolutely fantastic in this scene, and it's really creepy as well, because you know that Red Grant is in the shadows somewhere. You've got that weird Bulgarian agent in the mix. Bond's sort of moving pillar to pillar, not quite sure where to go, and Tatiana's across the way somewhere as well. And I just find it a really lovely scene to watch every single time I watch it. It's really well directed, and I love the way that the scene is filmed and what you can see and what you can't see. I think it's just an absolute masterclass of a scene, which is probably one that is not actually very well thought of among even fans of this movie. But you know what? I do actually have one criticism of this film, come to think of it. It's very, very... it's a nitpicky thing. I mean, when Bond goes to his hotel in Istanbul and he's walking around the room searching for bugs, the Bond theme comes on, and it's probably the only time in the series where the Bond theme is really overplayed. I mean, it's really in your face. I have to like turn it down like a couple of notches on the remote control just for this scene. It's like, turn that Bond theme off already. It's I think they play it like over and over again for like 3 minutes. It's a little bit too much, but on the whole, masterpiece of a movie. I do love From Russia With Love. Another controversial moment, me putting this film this high. I did say at the beginning of the video there would be controversial things about this ranking, but I absolutely love A View to a Kill. It is the Bond film of my youth. I mean, I was 5 when this came out. I just missed out on seeing it at the cinema. But I remember when it came out on home video, I remember going into a video store and seeing like 40 copies of A View to a Kill on the wall. It was like the in thing at the time. My cousin was babysitting me one day and she let me rent A View to a Kill, and that afternoon was just amazing for me. I like to think that this was the first Bond film I ever saw, but I'm honestly not sure, because I've been watching them since I was like knee-high. I honestly can't remember what the first one would have been, but I've always loved this. I don't understand why people don't like A View to a Kill. I've heard it said that Bond's too old in this one. I don't care. It doesn't affect the story. There's only one time in this that I really noticed that Roger's getting on a bit, and that's when he's hanging off the fire engine thing with one arm. I mean, even a bodybuilder had struggled to pull that one off. So at that moment, I'm kind of like, really, Roger? But I like the Stacey Sutton character as well. I've heard it said that she's one of the worst Bond girls. Not for me. I think she's a lot of fun, and I don't find her annoying at all. I don't need every one of my Bond girls to be some super tough, ass-kicking, martial arts expert CIA agent, you know. It's not like Stacey Sutton is thick either. I mean, she's a geologist. She's clearly a very smart woman. This character probably earns more money than the average American. And so what if she screams in a burning elevator? I would probably do the same. That's just normal human behaviour. And I don't have a problem with the age gap between Bond and Stacey as well. I think it's worked into the story quite well, you know, because when they first meet, they don't immediately jump into bed with each other. There is a little bit of awkwardness there. There is a recognition, I think, between the two that, you know, they are very different in age. But I think through their shared experiences and shared adventures, they do have this fling at the end of the film, and I think it's believable by that point. You know, it's not like they're going to go off and get married. They've survived this incredible experience together, and they've got together ultimately, but never had a problem with that part of the movie at all. Got to talk a little bit about Zorin, one of the best Bond villains in the series. He's absolutely awesome in this. The fight between him and Bond on Golden Gate Bridge, what a fantastic way to end Roger Moore's tenure. And I love Zorin's scheme with the mine in Silicon Valley. That moment where he kills all the miners just makes me laugh every single time. It's like, ha ha ha, ha ha ha. And the moment where Mayday comes out of the mine is one of my favourite moments in the entire franchise, never mind this film. She comes out with this bomb, blows herself up, and the expression on Zorin's face is priceless. I mean, as a viewer, we absolutely hate this guy by this point because he's such a twat. So to see him in that moment just absolutely stunned, it's just pure gold. And I love the soundtrack of the film as well. It's got one of the best theme tunes ever. The music that plays throughout the film is quite emotional, and there's this one particular tune that plays every time that there's danger in the film that I think is really great, adds momentum to all the action. Pre-title sequence in Siberia's great. I could go on. I love A View to a Kill. For me, this is a fantastic James Bond film. I'm absolutely content. It deserves a place in the top 5. I'll defend this film all day long. I don't quite feel the need to be as passionate in defending this one because it is a much more well-respected Bond film, if not necessarily one of people's favourites generally. If I had to guess, I'd say that a lot of Bond fans would maybe put this one halfway up their rankings. For me, I've got it very high. I think you have to be a certain type of person to properly appreciate the gloriousness of Thunderball. You have to be quite patient. You have to like slow-moving films. Possibly you need to even like older films. I know some Bond fans, the James Bond films might be the only films from the 60s and 70s they'll watch. I watch a lot of other films from the 60s and the 50s and the slow-moving sort of style that old cinema used to be. I don't mind it when this film is taking its time in shrublands and it's taking 35 minutes to get to Nassau. I'm absolutely fine with that. All the underwater stuff in this film I absolutely love. I'm a big fan of underwater cinema as well. It's not just the big battle near the end that I find to be really satisfying, but also just the scenes where Bond's deep sea diving in wreckages and going under Largo's boat. I love all that stuff. We've got a great Bond villain as well, Largo, a great Bond girl in Domino. Soundtrack, maybe not so good. Love the scene at the Junkanoo with Fiona. That is fantastic. If this film has a weakness, it's probably the ending. In fact, the ending to this film probably stops this film from going even higher than fourth. If the ending had been better, I might have put this one spot even higher in third, but it looks pretty terrible when Bond's fighting Largo and you see the back projections just awful. I mean, that ship would be easily clattering into rocks if we're to believe the images that we're seeing, but we've just had a big action sequence underwater before this scene, so maybe Bond and Largo should have fought on a boat that was still. I think they were trying to bite off more than they could chew for 1965. But on the whole, you know what? Big Thunderball fan. It's a terrific movie for me, and I'm happy to give it some love today and put it this high up. So we say goodbye to Sean Connery at this point, but I think he's done pretty well today. The 3-film run of From Russia With Love, Goldfinger and Thunderball for me is probably the best 3 consecutive Bond films you'll find in the franchise. I guess I could also mention The Spy Loved Me, Moonraker, For Your Eyes Only, but probably Moonraker lets the side down a little bit in that. I think universally among Bond fans, people would probably say that these 3 are the best 3 in a row sequence, if you see what I mean. It's hard to know what to add when it comes to talking about Goldfinger. It is a legendary film. It feels like the definitive Bond film of the 60s. The soundtrack, the look of it, the Aston Martin, watching Bond just cruise through the Alps in his car is just, it's chilled out and it's great. And then he makes this run on Goldfinger's factory in a really exciting sequence. I even like the golf stuff because I understand golf. I play golf, watch some golf sometimes. The ending in Fort Knox is fantastic. It literally does feel like you're at Fort Knox and you get that fantastic fight with Oddjob. I can't really think of anything to criticise. One thing, and it's a real nitpick, so when the gas comes out of Pussy Galore's planes, the way the soldiers just fall down is a bit pathetic. I mean, if you get choked by gas, then shouldn't you act something like this? But literally, these guys just fall down like toy soldiers, crumpling to the ground. I imagine it was a case of Guy Hamilton just being, in this general area with all these soldiers and just saying to his cameramen, look, we haven't got time to get a performance out of these guys. We're lucky they're even agreed to do it. So just get them to fall down and get the shot in the can so we can move on. Probably it was something like that. But that bit looks really iffy. But on the whole, Goldfinger is an amazing film. I think this is not going to be one of my more controversial opinions, and I'm quite certain that a lot of people will even have Goldfinger as their absolute best Bond film. I think 1 and 2 in any Bond ranking I do from now on is pretty much a lock. These 2 films I've got, first and second, they're just absolutely perfect for me. And I do go back and forth as to which is top and which one's second. Today it's The Spy Who Loved Me, but it's been very, very unlucky. It's a bit like it is with Liverpool and Man City in the English Premier League football or soccer if you're in America. 1 minute I think City is better, 1 minute I think Liverpool might just be better, and you're never quite sure. What can you say about The Spy Who Loved Me? It's just the most epically brilliant Bond film like ever. Well, apart from the film that I've got at number 1. The ski sequence at the beginning with that guy going off the cliff is just fantastic. Nobody Does It Better is my favourite Bond theme of all time. And then we get this amazing location in Egypt, one of my favourite places Bond has ever gone to. It's so funny when they go to that Egyptian show and Jaws is hiding on the sidelines and you get them funny sound effects, bow, 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 and he just kind of comes out the shadows, absolutely brilliant. And then Bond starts his relationship with Triple X as they go back to civilization. That arc is really good for me, how they develop their friendship, and there's this thing going on between them where she's not sure if she wants to get revenge on Bond because he killed her boyfriend, but it's a nice little subplot. All the stuff to do with the tanker in the last sort of 30, 40 minutes is just epic. I mean, it's brilliant, and the fighting's epic in this film as well. When Bond fights Sandor on the roof, the sound effects of the punches, they're so over the top, like something out of a Streets of Rage game from the Mega Drive days or something. Stromberg's scheme, I think, although it's not entirely the most realistic scheme anybody would come up with, it is enjoyable. And Atlantis as a Bond lair is absolutely fantastic. And Jaws in this movie is amazing. I mean, in the Moonraker he's crap, but in this film he's fantastic, genuinely scary villain. I love all the scenes that he's in this. So yeah, The Spy Who Loved Me. I mean, it's sitting on a settee watching this film, it's paradise on earth. If I had to release my memoirs tomorrow, I would call the book The Bond Fan Who Loved The Spy Who Loved Me. So here's my number one. I've not always loved this. When I was a child, I didn't like it as much as the Moore and the Connery ones. I think when you are really, really young, you naturally prefer Bond films where, you know, you recognise the actor as having been in quite a few of them, whereas if On Her Majesty's Secret Service ever did come on the TV, it would have been a case of, who's this guy? I guess I'll watch it for 20, 30 minutes, given that it is technically James Bond, but when I got towards adulthood, that's when I fully appreciated just how amazing this film is. I mean, it is a perfect spy film. Peter Hunt put every ounce of himself, I think, into this because every scene has got something about it. It's the production design is amazing. I love the hideout of Blofeld in this. It's not just... It's a film which wasn't just made with love for the James Bond character in the James Bond universe, but I think it was made with a love for the spy genre in general. It's a very human story. Characters behave in very human ways. Scenes and situations play out in a very believable way. When I watch this film, I almost feel like I am watching a reenaction of some story which did take place in Switzerland in the 1960s. It's amazing, and the ending is very sad, but it doesn't bother me as much as when Bond dies in No Time to Die. You know, every time I watch Majesties, I am sad for about 5 seconds at the end of this, and then I get on with the rest of my day and forget about it. With No Time to Die, I was pondering it for weeks, you know, but I love this film. I can mention so many different things about it that work for me. Best Blofeld, Pitt's Gloria should be called Pitt's Glorious. And George Lazenby did an absolutely fantastic job, considering the fact that he wasn't an actor, to come into this and do this so perfect. I mean, it might have been a happy accident. It might have been the way that Peter Hunt was just directing him and stuff, but he just nails Bond first time out. This guy was born to play James Bond. Very sad that he didn't go on to do more of them, but every single scene throughout this film, he gets the facial expressions right, he acts it the right way, just even little things, when he's scooping caviar up with a knife, it just feels very classy the way that he does it. So I know it's a bit of an obvious choice to have On Her Majesty's Secret Service at number one in your ranking. It does feel like something people do for cool points, maybe, you know, I've got the Bond film that was like the rogue Bond film as my number one, but it's just one of those weird things. Imagine making one Bond film and it just happens to be the best one of them all. That's how it is for me anyway. I love this film. It's fantastic. It is my number one. And that brings us to the end of the rankings video. Finally, it'll be a long, long time before I do this again. I'm not going to do this after the next Bond film. I think the next time I do a Bond rankings after this, it will be after the next person's tenure. So, I don't know, maybe 3 more films from now, 10 years from now, I might think about doing this again. But I'm going to let this rankings stew right here. I've got my order. It's set. I've done it. Not changing it now for a long, long time. So there it is. Right, thank you for watching. Thank you for sticking with me all the way through this very long video, and I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.